Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, both here in person in Carroll Auditorium and Madaleva Hall on campus, and the many folks who are coming into the live stream right now. We're delighted to have you in person or in spirit, or in person and in spirit, as it were. My name is Daniel Horan, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Center for Spirituality and professor of philosophy, religious studies, and theology here at St. Mary's College. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this event sponsored by the Center for Spirituality and by the Division of Inclusion and Equity that's led by Dr. Regina Hill. Founded in 1984 with generous support from the Sisters of the Holy Cross, the Center for Spirituality offers programs that promote the engagement between faith and reason and the connection between mind, body, and spirit. A hub for scholarly and public engagement, we draw on intellectual resources in the Catholic and Christian heritage, as well as how individuals practice faith in their daily lives to develop critical conversations around contemporary religious issues, especially as they relate to women's experiences in society, the academy, and the church. To learn more about upcoming events, please visit the Center for Spirituality website on the St. Mary's College webpage. And if you're here in person and in spirit, we have flyers by the door that indicate some of the upcoming events. As I mentioned earlier, we are featuring this event live streamed as well as in person. And so we want to take a moment to thank and welcome those who are joining us virtually and to beg their patience if we have some technical snafus as we're trying this new technology. Before we proceed with our exciting event this afternoon, we wish to acknowledge that we are gathering on sacred land and to honor the Native peoples who have been the traditional custodians of this place for generations. We particularly recognize the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and the Miami, who have cared for this land and its resources for many generations and continue to do so today. With deep gratitude, we recognize these Native peoples and their cultures within our community, as well as acknowledging the land upon which we at St. Mary's gather, pray, learn, and work. It is also, it would be remiss of me on this very important day for the Holy Cross families to not mention that this is the feast day of St. Basil Moreau, the founder of the Congregation of Holy Cross, and therefore of the communities in the Tri-Campus area, the Sisters of the Holy Cross and the Brothers and Priests of the Holy Cross. So we send a special greeting and blessing to all of our Holy Cross friends. Let me introduce our distinguished speaker today. Dr. Darryl Heller is the director of the Indiana University South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center and is assistant professor of women's and gender studies. He received his BA in philosophy from the College of Charleston, his MA in American Studies from Columbia University, and his PhD in history from the University of Chicago. While living in New York City, he co-founded the Amistad Institute, a nonprofit organization with the mission to design, develop, and implement educational programs for inner city communities. He currently teaches and facilitates discussions on the topics of racism and white supremacy, the history of racial construction, and the intersection of race and gender. Dr. Heller serves on the Dwyer School of Health Sciences Diversity Council, the IU South Bend Police Advisory Board, and is a board member of the Community Forum for Economic Justice and Amani Unidad. He is also a member of the City of South Bend's Board of Public Safety. Today, Dr. Heller will be speaking to us as the first in a three-part series titled Addressing the Soul Sickness of Racism. He's speaking today on the topic, More Than a March and a Speech, Civil Rights History in the U.S. Please join me in extending a warm St. Mary's welcome to Dr. Darryl Heller.
Great, thank you, Dan. And thank all of you who are here in person. Thank the virtual audience for joining us as well. And I'm just really pleased and honored to be here today. And I know that Regina Hill is on her way, and I want to just give her a thanks in advance as well for when she comes. Because this topic of addressing the soul sickness of racism, I think is important, in particularly in our contemporary moment, and particularly in the context of just having celebrated the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, just a few days ago. that many of us, were engaged in various events. And this is a weird time we're living in, right? Where we celebrate, but we have to be creative in that process. So I want to share just a couple of thoughts with you, because interestingly, Dr. King has been in the news of late from fairly unlikely sources. His infamous, I would dare say, his famous "I Have a Dream" speech delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the 1963 March on Washington has been selectively excerpted by conservatives and right-wing critics of the 1619 Project. That's the project and the work by Nicole Hannah-Jones that argues that race and slavery should be at the center of the telling of US history. And it's also been spoken of from critics of critical race theory and those who oppose that teaching. Critical race theory, as you know, is the perspective that race and racism is embedded in the legal and institutional structures of society. Both the 1619 Project and critical race theory, these critics assert, are out of step with King's dream. Both, they say, King taught us that one should be judged by the content of one's character, not the color of one's skin. But this is a decontextualized and a manipulated version of King's words. And it's particularly of his march and speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And it reduces the entire event that happened in 1963 down to one moment and a few words. Omitted is the earlier part of King's speech where he states that the reason that they're in the Capitol was to cash a check, that the architects of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, Black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious, King told his audience, that today America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. Those who misuse this historic march and speech forget about the journey that brought King and hundreds of thousands of others to the nation's capital. And most importantly, they ignore the fact that the words that King spoke were aspirational in his time as well as in ours. 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, he told those listening, the Negro is still not free. They remain crippled in the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. Almost 60 years after King spoke, we are still waiting for that check to clear. Those who focus on the March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech as if they were the entire civil rights movement do so out of cynicism and a frantic desire to maintain the structures that buttress white supremacy. However, the vision that King laid out in 1963, it bears reminding, was aspirational. It was a desire for white children as well as Black children to have a world different than the one that he was living in. This is what dreams do. They are projections into the future and are based on present conditions. They are not about where you are, but about where you want to be. And despite the appropriation of the march and the speech for self-serving ends, we are not there yet. Danielle Sered, a brilliant and passionate advocate for restorative justice, wrote a book titled Until We Reckon. She spoke about many things that we have to reckon with, but one fundamental thing that requires reckoning is the history of slavery and oppression that produced our current society. James Baldwin, another brilliant American who, by the way, stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with King in 1963, wrote that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. King understood this, and his words, his deeds, and his life was a call for all of us to reckon with the past so that we could understand our present. He understood, unlike those who would freeze him in a moment of time, rather than deal with him as a living and dynamic human being who lived his life out of love, that until we come to terms with where we are in the present, we cannot create a future that recognizes and respects the humanity of everyone. So when I thought about what I wanted to say about the history of the civil rights movement, I struggled with what to share with you. Obviously, to discuss the full breadth of the movement, which arguably began after the first Africans were taken off a Dutch slave ship in 1619, is not possible in the time that we have here today. But since I'm here at St. Mary's College, and the fact that I teach in the Women and Gender Studies program at IUSB, I thought I would highlight some of the women on whose shoulders Dr. King stood. Some you have heard of, and others may be less recognized. But before I begin sharing that, I want to play a song for you. And so I'm just going to start this. So the song that we just heard was titled Ella's Song. And it was originally written by Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, the founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee Freedom Singers in 1961. And she also founded the a cappella group Sweet Honey in the Rock, who you just saw perform in 1973. Now, I could actually spend this entire time just talking about Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan and all of the contributions and the significance of what she gave to the movement. But I'm going to save that for another time. What I want to talk about is the person she wrote the song for, because that song was a tribute to Ella Baker, who was arguably the most significant, under-recognized leader of the movement that gave birth to Dr. King. How many of you actually know of Ella Baker? Has anybody heard of, know of a little bit? I'm going to take a few minutes and I want to share a couple of things about her that I think you should know. I also want to encourage you to learn more about this powerful woman whose shoulders the modern civil rights movement was built. Oh, I got my clicker. And there we go. For our purposes, Ella Baker's story begins in 1941 when she became an assistant field director for the NAACP. Her work entailed extensive travel throughout the South, a period in which she came to realize that Blacks in the South had to take charge of their own struggle and that they had the capacity to do so. During this time, she began building local networks that would be invaluable links to be tapped as the civil rights movement matured. Recognizing the skills that she brought, Ms. Baker was appointed as the NAACP's National Director of Branches in 1943, becoming the highest ranking female staff member of the organization. However, she was frustrated with the top-down structure of the NAACP and resigned in 1944, a statement about her principles and her belief that the movement had to be built from the bottom up. She returned to Harlem and worked as a fundraiser for the National Urban League while continuing to work with the local NAACP chapter in New York. After the formation of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the aftermath of the Montgomery bus boycott, she became the SCLC's executive director in 1957, where she outlined a strategy she called the Crusade for Citizenship, which privileged local leadership. For she thoroughly understood that change is local and had to be sustained when national leaders like Dr. King moved on to other things. She worked with and supported other important leaders such as Septima Clark and Bernice Robinson in their work to teach literacy throughout the South in their Freedom School network. Ella Baker was also attentive to the student sit-in movement to desegregate lunch counters. This movement began in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960, and was another moment in which her leadership, insight, and wisdom became pivotal. She anxiously watched these events unfold and grew impatient with the cautious leadership of Martin Luther King and the SCLC. As protests on lunch counters spread to other cities, she organized the meeting of student leaders at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina in April 1960. Fending off efforts by mainstream civil rights organizations like the SCLC and the NAACP to co-opt these students, she guided and supported them to chart their own path, recognizing that their energy and courage needed to be self-directed. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, grew out of this meeting, and it would become one of the most militant organizations participating in the civil rights movement. And finally, when the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party had its nominating convention in August 6, 1964, in Jackson, Mississippi, Ms. Baker was asked to be the keynote speaker. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, for those of you who may not know, was organized to serve as a vehicle through which to run Black candidates to challenge the Southern Democratic Party and the segregationists who dominated it. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was also the organization in which Fannie Lou Hamer came to prominence. 2 days before the convention in which she was to speak, the battered bodies of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were found buried in a dam near Philadelphia, Mississippi. Ms. Baker's speech, which eulogized the murdered civil rights activists, was both mournful and militant. Blacks have been murdered at will for decades without a national outcry. She noted this and told those listening, until the killing of Black mothers' sons is as important as the killing of white mothers' sons, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. These are the words and the context that inspired Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan to write Ella's song. And these are the footprints that Dr. King stepped into and followed. I share this because we must remember that King did not appear out of nowhere. Many others preceded him, and many others have yet to come. Another Black woman who created the opening through which Dr. King rose to prominence was Rosa Parks, who, despite the popular narrative, was not an old, tired seamstress with tired feet, but she was a longtime activist who spent decades working for justice before that fateful day when she refused to give up her seat to a white man. Rosa Parks first joined the NAACP in 1943 and eventually became the secretary of the Montgomery chapter. She worked on a number of justice issues as an NAACP member, including fighting on behalf of a 26-year-old Black woman who was gang raped at gunpoint by 6 white men, and also to free Jeremiah Reeves, a 16-year-old Black teenager who was charged and eventually executed after being accused of rape by his white girlfriend when neighbors found out about their relationship. In 1948, Parks became the secretary of the Alabama State Branch of the NAACP and traveled throughout the state speaking against violence directed towards Black people. She also founded the NAACP Youth Council and organized young people to engage in a series of protests at the Montgomery Public Library, which excluded Blacks, but also which had a better collection than the library that was set aside for Black folks in Montgomery. And in the summer of 1955, Parks attended a 2-week workshop on the United Nations at Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. Participants were encouraged to contextualize the problems facing their communities within the larger global movement for human rights and come up with concrete steps to create change in their local community. When she was arrested on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks carried a long history of activism. Her act of refusing to give up her seat was a demand that she be treated with dignity and respect. This was a deliberate and self-conscious decision, which became the spark of a national movement for justice and inclusion. In this line of important Black women, we must also note that Rosa Parks was not the first woman to be arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white person in Montgomery. 9 months before Rosa Parks stepped into history, Claudette Colvin, a straight A, well-mannered, and deeply religious 15-year-old high school student, sat near the back of a bus, well in the section reserved for Blacks. When the bus filled and the driver demanded that Black riders in the segregated section give up their seat to standing whites, Claudette, knowing that she was far back enough to have a right to her seat, refused to give it up when the driver turned to her. She would later say that her inspirations for defying what she knew to be unjust laws were 2 other Black women, Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. She was arrested and charged with misconduct, resisting arrest, and violating the city segregation laws. Although negotiations with the city led organizers to expect charges would be dropped against her, she was tried under state law instead of city ordinances, and after being found guilty, was released with indefinite probation under her parents' care. This arrest would remain on her record until 2021, when it was finally expunged. Talk of a boycott after Claudette was arrested was bandied about in town, but it was decided that she was too young and too dark to build the citywide movement around. The Montgomery bus boycott, though, through which the world was introduced to Dr. King, would not have been possible without other Black women who laid the groundwork. A little known fact is that it was the Women's Political Council, headed by Joanne Gibson Robinson, that initiated and spearheaded the bus boycott in its early days before this SCLC came into being. The Women's Political Council was founded in 1946 by Mary Fairbanks Burks, who was the chair of the English department of Alabama State College, 9 years before the boycott. Its mission was to inspire Negroes to live above mediocrity, to elevate their thinking, to fight juvenile and adult delinquency, to register to vote, and in general, to improve their status as a group. Early members were mostly professional women, principals, teachers, social workers, nurses, and other working women. Joanne Robinson took over as head of the organization in 1950, and the need to challenge the conditions under which Blacks lived and the desire to participate in changing those conditions fueled the growth of the Women's Political Council, such that by 1955, there were 3 chapters throughout the city. When Rosa Parks was arrested on Thursday, December 1st, 1955, she was quickly bailed out and her trial was scheduled for Monday, December 5th. By Friday night, the Women's Political Council, and Robinson, with the help of 2 of her students, had printed off 50,000 flyers that said in part, another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown in jail because she refused to get out of her seat on a bus for a white person to sit down. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too, for if Negroes did not ride the buses, they would not operate. This woman's case, Rosa Parks, will come up on Monday. We are therefore asking every Negro to stay off the buses Monday in protest of the arrest and trial. If you work, take a cab or walk. But please, children and grown-ups, don't ride the bus at all on Monday. Please stay off all buses Monday. The ensuing boycott was initially planned as a one-day protest. However, its stunning success led to 381 days of Blacks walking, taking cabs, carpooling, and finding other creative ways to get to work, school, and other places around town. Rosa Parks has sparked a movement, but as she noted, the movement could happen only because a number of people and organizations were already in place. I was just one of many who fought for freedom, she said. Without Joanne Robinson and the Women's Political Council, the boycott would have looked very different. And without these and countless and nameless others, the legacy of Dr. King would not be our inspiration. So as I end, I want to return to the march and the speech that King delivered on August 28th, 1963. That march was but one more step in a longer and larger march of the civil rights movement. As King neared the end of his remarks that day, he declared, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Although progress has been made since then, the stream is still only a trickle. We are living today in the aftermath of the public execution of George Floyd and in the midst of a global pandemic that has shined a bright light on the health and economic disparities between Blacks and whites in the US and between the global North and the global South internationally. The forward movement that King and others made towards justice is in retreat in an environment in which voting rights are under attack and where mass incarceration continues unabated. All is not dark, however. The movement continues. The courageous stands and sacrifices of people like Colin Kaepernick and the continuing vision of Black women such as Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors, the creators of the Black Lives Matter hashtag, show us that hope is alive. Here in South Bend, groups are working on issues that include restorative justice, reparations, healthcare and education reform, and police accountability. The civil rights movement is more than a march and a speech. It is the daily activity that we all do, such that one day, not today, because we still have a long way to go, but one day, we will be able to say with King, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heller. We have some time now for some questions and conversation, and I'm gonna bounce back and forth with this microphone for the folks in the room so that our friends who are manifold online can hear you. And I will relay comments and questions that come in remotely. I'll begin with just a comment that comes from our viewers online. One person writes, "Thank you, Dr. Heller, for speaking of women's place in the King era and speaking of the now and our work that we have to do. So there's a sense of gratitude.
You're very welcome.
Other comments or questions? Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I just have a question because I see some staff and faculty that work here in the room. Is there a class that's offered at St. Mary's that like is specifically catered to like Black women in history by any chance? I'm just curious because I haven't heard of like a few of these women and I'm quite startled by that a little bit. So I was just curious if anyone knew by any chance.
Mhm.
I think the silence might be an answer. Yeah, noted. Thank you.
No, but but one thing I will say, and you're not alone in that many people have not heard of these women, and it's one of the faults of how we teach history. So I'm a historian by training, and that's what I teach, kind of in my women's gender studies. So I'm teaching a class now, for example, called Gender and Justice, and really looking kind of historically at, especially at the intersection of race and gender, how women of color particularly, but women more generally, have been, how they interact and have been intersected with the justice system, mostly in not so positive ways. So work that we have to learn this history is crucial, and we have to learn these people because they are our inspirations.
Just a little addendum to that question. Our folks online have pooled their knowledge.
Right on.
So one response says that Dr. Anne-Marie Short in English is teaching an African-American literature course about Black women writers this semester. And Dr. Jamie Wagman's classes on U.S. history were highlighted as well. So thank you for our friends online.
Yeah, and Dr. Wagman and I interacted quite a bit as well.
We have another question online. Not to put you on the spot in the presence of our president, but somebody asks, if you could recommend a speaker for our commencement this year, who would you think of?
How much money y'all got to spend? Let's think about that for a second. Like 5 people come to mind, multiple people. What's that?
How about Nicole Hannah Jones?
Excellent suggestion.
We have another comment online. And this person says, thank you for the information. In my philosophy of gender class today, we actually spoke about the lack of information and miscommunication regarding history. I'm going to do more research on all of these people you mentioned. So
Great.
Thanks.
This was wonderful. I feel like I've learned so much even from such a brief presentation already. And one of the things that I'm struck by is that you're really illuminating the fact that women were always a part of the civil rights movement. Yet it strikes me that perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, they weren't necessarily in the headlines in the mainstream media in the same way that maybe in Black Lives Matter. I hear regularly about how the founders of the hashtag were women.
Mm-hmm.
The media is going to them for comments on Black Lives Matter. I'm curious if you think that makes a difference for the movement for racial justice today, that women are more go-tos for kind of leadership and comment. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think partly is giving credit where credit is due, because as you said, women have always been not just in the movement, but leaders in the movement. And they've also fought for leadership and have often been silenced, because, within the Black community as well within the society at large, it's a patriarchal context. And so the voices of women to be heard, even when they're not just as qualified, but often more qualified to lead and or to speak or to do whatever needs to be done, they're often silenced. I mean, we saw this very clearly in the Black Panther Party, for example, or the Young Lords or some of the other movements that were fighting for social justice. I think in our contemporary world, younger folks have a deeper sensitivity to gender differences, both gender identity, gender differences, and I think are much more open and receptive to hearing and following the leadership of women. But I know that certainly my generation, that's been a challenge for men to kind of step back and not relate as if they are the only ones that are the keepers of knowledge or the keepers of power or whatever that might look like. But I think that represents the Black Lives Matter with the 3 women who formulated that hashtag, and the recognition and acknowledgement of it is a little one of those incremental little progress that we are making.
So we have a comment and a question from online. The comment says, Black women civil rights leaders have not been in our history textbooks either. So an affirmation of and gratitude for your presentation. And a question that begins, thanks for highlighting Ella's song. It's one of my favorites. However, lately, I've been struggling with the idea, quote, not resting until our work is done. When the value of rest is essential to the work we do, are there any examples of these women that you highlighted, quote, at rest?
Yeah, I almost put an image in the slide. So Highlander, how many of you have heard of Highlander Folk School or Highlander? Now it's called Highlander Research and Education Center. It's right outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. It's a really critical part of the civil rights movement. I won't go into the full history of it, but it was one of the few, if only, places where Black and white people could actually get together, organize together, eat together, and just socialize together in the segregated South in the 1950s. And folks would go there on retreats. Dr. King went there, Ella Baker went there, Rosa Parks went there, September Clark went there. It was founded by a man named Miles Horton, who was poor white trash, so to speak, from Appalachia. But he built that school as a way of both preserving Appalachian culture and as a labor institute in the 1930s and 40s, and then transitioned it when he recognized that the civil rights movement was the critical fight for justice in the country, to invite these organizers. And folks would go there to rest, as well as to organize, but it was a place of nourishment. And it's always a challenge for activists. I know for myself, as I think about it, is I rest periodically, and others do too. But we also know that there are folks out there who don't have that luxury, and that it's really finding that balance between ensuring that we're sustainable, and all of us, including yourselves, are sustainable over time, while simultaneously not resting on the privilege that we have to be able to sit back and most of us make a choice to be on the front lines, but there's folks on the front lines, like those who are incarcerated, for example, who don't have a choice. And so there is a balance in there.
Dr. Heller, thank you so much for coming and sharing with our campus. I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
As you know, critical race theory has been politicized, and right now there is an attack on how historical truths are being told, and some of those narratives are being suppressed in the classrooms. So I just want to know, what do you think are some of the dangers of some of the legislation that we see coming down from politicians on how we discuss the history, and especially the historical truths that are trying to be silenced?
No, that's a really important question. And it took a lot of energy for me not to put critical race theory, except in that one little piece in the front. Because critical race theory, I think, is critically important. And particularly excavating that history. I'm pretty convinced, I'm deeply convinced that unless and until we actually talk about the full history of this country, and especially the history of its founding, its rootedness, we won't be able to change the racial dynamic that's existing today. It's an outgrowth of that silence, is why the division, I'm pretty convinced, is there. So I'll share this. I'm working on, as a historian, I'm working on a reconceptualization of history. I'm calling it critical race history. That really is opening up and challenging, for example, the discussions around the nation's founding and the writing of the Constitution. And we always talk about, how brilliant the Declaration of Independence and how inclusive, and that this was universal language. But when 10 of the first 12 to 14 presidents owned slaves, we can't say that this was an anti-slavery nation. And the document that a majority, I'm not quite sure, I did do the math on it, but a significant number of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were slave owners. And so unless we acknowledge that, and we acknowledge it objectively and clearly and really account for that, or Danielle Sered would say, until we reckon with that, I don't think we can get out of this morass. And so critical race theory as a framework from which we can look at that history, we can look at the embeddedness and the structures of that were produced out of that history. We're going to wander in the wilderness for a lot longer.
We have a few more comments coming in from online. One person writes, I think, an affirmation of Dr. Hill's question in your response that, quote, there is a bill in the Florida legislature that will bar schools and private companies from teaching anything about U.S. history that gives white people, quote, discomfort. Mm-hmm. And the second comment is a comment of enthusiasm from Arlene Peterson, who works with DEI initiatives for the Poor Handmaids of Jesus Christ near at Ancilla College, just south of us. And she says, OMG, thank you for mentioning Highlander. I'm working on a project with the Fetzer Institute, and W.K. Kellogg to focus on rest and rest space for racial healing. I hope we can connect with your work.
Yes, I would love that. And that bill in our state legislature, I think, is House Bill 1167. I can't remember if it's the House or the Senate, but it's 1167 that's working to ban the kinds of conversations that we desperately need to be having. And we need to be having them at that level, with our young people, that we have to reframe how they see the world and how they operate within it in terms of the relationships that they have with others.
Any other comments or questions for Dr. Heller, either here or online?
She has a question. She had her hand up, then she snatched it down.
Miss Colvin, the teenager.
Yes.
I had read or knew that someone who preceded Rosa Parks, that Rosa Parks was chosen based on the color, the hue of her. But I never knew it was someone so young. Mm. And I wondered if there is more that you could say about Miss Colvin. She was like 15 when she did that, and the statement that she made as to what gave her the courage, the women who gave her the courage, looked more like her than they did Rosa Parks. Right. So is there another little nugget you could say about Miss?
I could talk about Miss Claudette Colvin, who was somebody many people don't know, not enough people know. Again, this is kind of one of the voices that's been obscured. And it's also the fact, as Ella Baker recognized, that it's young people that really have been also drivers of the movement. So Claudette Colvin was a really smart young woman. She was born in a farm about 30 miles outside of Montgomery, moved into Montgomery when she was like 9. I think with her grandparent. one of her grandparents. And she had the aspiration to be a civil rights lawyer. And she loved to read. And her favorite, I mean, I can give you a couple nuggets. Her favorite author was Edgar Allan Poe. And when she was arrested, she recognized, and also the other reason, which is important, I think, is that she wasn't chosen as the person to rally around, is that she became pregnant shortly after she was arrested. So she was an unwed teenage mom. And so she, you know, it's this, what's the phrase? The context of respectability. She wasn't respectable enough to represent the movement. And so she was kind of more or less shunted aside. But it's important to know this as well about her, is that the case, and I don't remember exactly the name of it, but there was a case, the Montgomery bus boycott segregation case went to the Supreme Court. Browder versus, and I looked at it this morning, but I can't pull it out right now. But she was one of the 4 plaintiffs. And so she testified to the Supreme Court about segregation. And the lawyers in Montgomery wanted to make it seem like Black folks were happy with the way things were in Montgomery and the segregation. And it was outside agitators like Dr. King that was stirring the pot. And it was folks like Claudette Colvin who dismissed those kinds of characterizations of what was happening. So yeah, she was extremely courageous, and she never became a civil rights lawyer. She moved to New York. She moved up north and worked as a nursing aide, and then eventually moved to Texas. And she consciously went back to Montgomery last year and requested that her arrest be expunged from her record from the juvenile courts. And the prosecutor agreed. And so it was expunged. She was 82 at that time.
Did that arrest play into her not going on for further education?
I think it was both the arrest and also I think she felt shunted aside, particularly after Rosa Parks was arrested. And there had been a number of arrests. Claudette Colvin, as far as I know, was the youngest person who really just took a stand and said, no, I know that this is unjust and I have a right to this seat. And in the segregated section, I mean, it's really important to remember that for Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin, they weren't sitting in the white only section. They were sitting in the Black section. And the deal was that when the bus filled, and if white people got on the bus and all of the white section was filled, Black people were asked to get out of the segregated section to stand and give their seats to white people. And many did. It was just easier, path of least resistance. But Claudette Colvin is like, I know I am righteous in this. But it was, I think it was several factors. I think it was also her pregnancy. I think it was also the fact that as the movement progressed, I don't think she got the support she certainly deserved. And so, yeah, she did not realize that dream.
Well, we are at about time. And on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Regina Hill, the Vice President for Inclusion and Equity, and the Center for Spirituality, we want to thank you, Dr. Heller, for this wonderful presentation, in a special way for tailoring it to the mission and heritage and work of St. Mary's College. And so we're so grateful for your time and for your wisdom and for the history you've shared. So please join me virtually and in person in thanking Dr. Heller.